Sure.
Oh, you're fine.
Well, I'm going to start off with a little question and answer, because I know a lot of you guys have heard a lot about this already. So, how many people don't know about the water snake? A few? For real? Who has not heard about the Lake Erie Water Snake? Okay.
I don't think I have, yeah.
Okay. Well, I know we have some people that are like seasoned pros, that Tom and Matt, for example, that have been out here multiple times to do stories on the Lake Erie Water Snake. But this is Ethel. I'm going to introduce the animal that you're going to see right now. She's actually our captive Lake Erie Water Snake that we use to introduce our school kids in our field trip program about Lake Erie Water Snakes. We actually had a few different individuals, and Ethel was the banded individual. We had another individual that unfortunately recently just passed from us that was unbanded. Lake Erie water snakes are a subspecies of northern water snake that were originally described as having this reduced color pattern out here on the islands. And they are restricted to these islands in the western basin of Lake Erie. This animal was formally federally listed as a threatened and state endangered animal. So it was federally threatened, state endangered back in 1999 because of low population size. Obviously we have, if you look around the islands, we had a lot of habitat destruction, people wanting to build cottages, clearing those habitats in a non-snake friendly way. And then we also had one of the most well-documented cases of population decline through direct human persecution. So because people were actually clearing out all these habitats, they were coming into contact with these snakes and then purposefully eradicating as many as they could. So because of those reasons, again, as I mentioned, they were listed as federally threatened, state endangered. I've been working on the population since right after the listing. I came on as just a graduate student in 2000, working on a large-scale telemetry project that we had started, trying to still learn some of the things that about just the snake life history that we still did not know at the time. Just for example, about how much shoreline habitat the snakes were using, where in relation to the shoreline they hibernated. And those pieces of information were necessary because what a lot of people don't realize is, the idea of putting something on the list of federally threatened and endangered animals isn't just put them on the list, right? You actually want to develop what's called a recovery plan that's going to talk about the types of things that need to happen in order to hopefully recover those populations to a point where they no longer need to be federally protected. So those pieces of information that like I said, when I first came on, were really vital for us to include and to be able to talk about when we went ahead and wrote the recovery plan, which we did in 2003. At that same time then is when my role within the water snake program shifted. So I came on and I just kind of started as a graduate student. And then by 2003, we had this recovery plan in place, and we had a lot of these goals set that needed to be met in order, like I said, to hopefully recover the population. So my role then changed to recovery plan coordinator, in which I basically oversaw all of the things that needed to happen. We had kind of a research component, so we still needed to kind of look at the populations, do things like estimate their population size and density. We were doing things like looking at their diet, what kinds of things were they eating, again, the habitat questions, where were they hibernating, how much shoreline did they use. Then also became very involved with the local land trust groups to work with them to develop a conservation easement initiative program that was kind of focused around the water snake. We had funds that were made available through Ohio Division of Wildlife to encourage local landowners to place a conservation easement on their property that would protect that property for specifically water snakes. And the incentive then for the landowner was that usually when you place a conservation easement that there's a tax benefit so that their property taxes are actually lowered when you place an easement. So we started that. And then the other big component was obviously, I mentioned that there was this huge human persecution threat to the water snake. So we developed then a very, very large scale education and outreach campaign surrounding the water snakes. and really just talking about, you know, some basic life history, that these were not a venomous species. It was not necessarily something that people needed to be afraid of, that they were actually a historic and beneficial component to the Lake Erie ecosystem here. And obviously, we focused a lot on that next generation, on a lot of the local kids that we had here. And again, working with some of the local land trust and nature groups, we incorporated a water snake lesson into the nature camps. And so the good news is that within a very short period of time, we actually were able to achieve all of those recovery goals basically by 2010. We were able to propose the water snake to be removed from the list of threatened and endangered animals. And in September of 2011, we actually did achieve the delisting. It became the 23rd species to be removed from the list of threatened and endangered animals, which is an accomplishment that we're really proud of. Most people don't get to come on to a project and actually get to see the animal that they've been working on actually come off. You know, usually it's a lifetime of work then before you actually get to see something like that happen. But I think a lot of the things that we were able to do are really something that the Fish and Wildlife Service are proud to talk about, how that this is the way that recovery should happen. We were very proactive in a lot of the things and efforts that we put forth, especially again, like I mentioned, within the habitat protection and management and within the education and outreach, that I think a lot of conservation programs don't have the luxury of being that proactive. And again, that was because I was very fortunate in being able to be out here full time as the recovery coordinator, kind of making sure we were kind of meeting our goals and doing all of these things. So right now we are in what is called the post-delisting monitoring period. So a lot of the questions that we get are, well, now that the snake's delisted, are you out of a job? You know, like, well, no, they're not going to throw me out on the street. I'm actually still working with the water snakes. Obviously, when you work with a species for 13, 14 plus years, that's just what I've been working on, and then our data set actually goes back 30 plus years. You end up with one of the largest, actually most robust data sets for any snake in the world, that we can actually do some really interesting population biology science with. In fact, you know, again, we get pretty lucky with the data that we've been able to collect and the types of parameters that we can estimate for snakes in general, that really kind of help just snake biologists and herpetologists understand more about the life history of these animals. But again, we are in the post-delisting monitoring period, so what that means is that, you know, once you remove the federal protection, you don't want to just be like, okay, yeah, we're done. So with this species, we are having a 5-year post-delisting period, and we continue to do the similar types of monitoring that we have been doing all throughout the recovery, which include a lot of the mark recapture work. So all of our adult animals, we put in a small microchip under the skin. It's called a pit tag. That's how we get the majority of our mark recapture data, as well as a lot of our growth data. Reproductive data is, you know, from knowing which female is growing, you know, to a specific sexual maturity and when she's giving birth, so things like that. A lot of that data comes from the mark recapture. So we continue to do that, as well as, again, monitoring their diet, which that was a huge factor that actually helped us achieve recovery so quickly. So early on in the study with the water snakes, we noticed that these animals were coming into the shoreline very frequently with round goby. So as everybody know what a round goby is? If you don't know what a round goby is, we actually have, I brought a couple over here in the tank over here. It's an invasive species introduced through ballast water exchange, and pretty much has taken over the bottom of the nearshore waters around Lake Erie. Normally when we hear about invasives, typically it's a bad thing. Well, unless you happen to be a bottom-dwelling fish-eating species, in which case the water snakes really ended up taking advantage of this new food resource. As early as so the gobies came into Lake Erie about mid-90s, 95, 96. And by 98, we found our first samples of gobies in water snake diet when we would do a quick snapshot of the population as far as the diet analysis. By 2001 to 2003, we had done another subset of, again, looking at stomach content analysis. By that time, the percentage of gobies was over 90%. Just this past year, this is another year where we're looking at, again, what's the percentage of different prey items in the diet. We're at 98% round gobies. So this fish has become a very critical component of this animal's now existence. So part of the post-delisting monitoring includes looking at goby populations and their stability. Beyond that, the benefits that the water snake have gotten from eating round gobies through a lot of research that we've done over the past 10 years. Since they started eating gobies, the snakes now grow bigger, so they actually attain larger maximum body sizes than ever before. They actually attain those body sizes faster, so they grow faster. They have a higher reproductive output, so females are actually producing more young per female. They have a higher survivorship, and they have an overall higher population growth rate. And so when you look at all of those things combined, that basically was the result, or the result is a population explosion of water snakes, which is exactly what we've seen, not just here locally on the Lake Erie Islands, but also those mainland water snakes that are living along the marinas that, again, have massive amounts of gobies are also experiencing these very large increases in water snakes that they're seeing because of these round gobies. So for the water snakes, it is a good thing. And now comes the time when we'll do a little demonstration to see if Ethel will actually eat a round goby for you. So you can kind of see how they will forage.
Oh.
See if she cooperates. I put a little feeding platform in here.
Oh, they can.
Might have to take it out, but I wanted her to be able to have something to eat on if she wanted it. But normally when they are foraging, they'll go down actually go all the way down to the bottom of the lake. They don't actually swim around at the top and look for fish that way. They actually go all the way down to the bottom, and they will actually crawl along and probe the interstitial spaces of these boulders, looking for gobies that are kind of nestled or hiding amongst the rocks. Come on, Ethel, don't you want to eat today?
How big is your population yet? Snakes?
That's a great question. It's actually at about 12,000 right now, between 10 and 12,000 for the Lake Erie Islands. At the time of listing, it was at 1,500 to 2,000 adult individuals left.
What was the
So,
year of the listing?
1999.
I really noticed it's a very vicious python. This is entirely different.
No, she's just because she's a captive. So we've had her since she was about this big. We've had her for a couple of years now. She's actually 3. So we had her since she was about this big, and so she's very used to being handled. Oh yeah, now the wild ones, when you pick them up, they are extremely aggressive, which actually leads me to a good point. The snake that Captain Craig is holding is an eastern fox snake, which is actually another species of concern in Ohio, and it's actually another fairly rare snake just within North America as well. It's only found just in the western counties surrounding Lake Erie, in eastern Michigan, and then southern Ontario. In Ontario, Canada, this animal is listed as endangered. Michigan, it's listed as threatened. In Ohio, it's a species of concern. And from all of our data, because this is another animal that we continue to monitor through mark recapture, and we do kind of look and see how their populations are doing as well. Everything that we are seeing says that the populations in Ohio are doing quite well. And they're actually able to exist in fairly fragmented habitat, which is a good thing considering we have so much habitat fragmentation that's gone on within the Western Basin region, especially that Lake Erie marshland area, which is what the fox snakes are typically associated with. But because the water snakes are going back to your aggression question, they are such an aggressive species, you don't necessarily want to take a wild water snake out of the bag and be like, here, little kid, don't you want to like hold on to this biting animal? Like, isn't this going to be great? Don't you want to love this animal? It's not really going to work so well. So what we would try to do is we would use other species that were local again, but that were a little bit more charismatic, a little bit easier to handle, to create a positive experience about snakes in general. Because for most people, when you're dealing and you're talking about a conservation issue around this specific snake, if they have an issue with snakes, it's not particularly this one or that one, it's snakes in general, right? So when we would create this, oh, did she get one? No, when you create this positive experience, especially for kids, you know, then all of a sudden the attitude becomes a little bit different. So, that was where we tried to do
So you've done a wonderful job of creating this positive atmosphere for the snake, which people were already leery about back then. There were 1,200 of them, and now there's 12,000 of them.
Yeah.
They are aggressive and they bite. So are you getting any kind of backlash? Are people saying, hey, you told us this snake was endangered?
Well, a little
Where
bit.
I go, I see one.
A little bit, and that's a great question, because even right from the get-go, when we really started pushing a lot of the education and outreach, which was mid-2000s, we had already started to see a significant increase in water snake numbers by that time. And when you start to talk to people about, well, this is a threatened or an endangered species, and they're going out to their dock in, you know, every morning, and they're like, I just saw like 50 of them. How can you tell me that this is endangered? Like, you don't make any sense. So you would have to like talk about scale, you know, obviously, like, you know, again, pushing and reiterating the fact that these animals are only on these islands, and yes, even though they're very locally abundant, you can't go to Kentucky and find a Lake Erie water snake. You know, so that was definitely part of the education that we had to pass on. Another huge component that we did was pamphlets and brochures and a lot of outreach about how to deal with problematic water snakes. We actually developed several different living with Lake Erie water snakes, like if you're a boater, like what to do if they get on your boat, what to do if they get into your shed or your window wells at home, or if they're under your patio furniture, like what kinds of things these landowners could do in order to either discourage them or remove them from certain areas that, again, tried to discourage lethal means. Because, again, we didn't want to necessarily have people going out and killing them, but we didn't necessarily want people to feel uncomfortable in their own backyards. So that was really how we handled it. And yes, now that we're at 12,000, it makes that education and outreach that much more, I guess, challenging. And it continues to be something that we have to do. The Lake Erie Islands, you know, obviously we get 10 to 15,000 visitors here every day, and those people aren't necessarily from here. So, you know, again, just talking about that this is an endemic animal only found here is something that we'll probably always have to do. We've really tried to focus on getting long-term displays at some of the nature centers, and obviously, you know, here when they talk with us, and we actually incorporate some of the Lake Erie water snake stuff that we've done here within our public tours on Gibraltar. So we really try to get the word out that way. Yes.
So
What are the natural predators, and are you worried about there being at some point too many?
Of water snakes. We have been seeing kind of a leveling out of the population for a while. Like I was mentioning, in the mid-2000s, we were really seeing some exponential growth. Right now, it looks like they're leveling out because our population estimates have been fluctuating just a little bit that's where it's going, between 10 and 12,000, and that's probably where they'll stay. The main predators of the water snake depend on what life history stage we're talking. So when water snakes are born, they actually give live birth. The young of the year are about the size of a pencil, like really tiny little, basically the size of a night crawler. So all of our birds that would eat a night crawler, we're seeing them, you know, go through the lawn and eat water snakes. I've seen a robin shoving a water snake down a little baby robin's throat, grackles, egrets. But then when you get to something like Ethel, who she's close to adult size, our smaller females and adult males are preyed upon by our blue herons and egrets quite regularly. In fact, we've initially, when I started working out here, and then as we've kind of progressed, you know, through the years, anecdotally, I've started seeing a lot more, and I would have people commenting on a lot more herons and egrets that they're seeing. And we actually tried to work with the Crane Creek and the Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge to try to get some type of data to correlate a positive increase in the heron and egret population. We didn't really, unfortunately, they don't really have anything like a hard number that we can use to say that yes, there definitely are, but we are seeing, just again through accounts of people seeing these herons and egrets a lot more frequently and regularly feeding on water snakes at their docks or on their beaches. So we're probably seeing an increase in those predators as well, which you would expect.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you use around your house or garage or boat to keep them away without doing something lethal?
We actually, just last year I had an REU student that looked at a few different snake deterrents to see which worked. There's actually a product, over-the-counter product called Snake Away. You can buy at Home Depot. Its active ingredients are sulfur and then naphthalene, naphthalene is again in mothballs. She actually tested mothballs as well. And then there was some information kind of floating around on the internet, these kind of home remedies of how do you keep snakes away that recommended cinnamon oils. So we tried a cinnamon oil. Those were her 3 that she tested. She actually did find that Snake Away did significantly deter water snakes from a specific area better than the other 2, although mothballs was the second best. And Snake Away tends to be a little bit more expensive, and mothballs is it's like 49 cents a box. But, what I do, and usually when I recommend that to people and they do use it, I remind them though that you're not going to have snakes, but then your boat might really stink or whatever, because mothballs don't really smell that great either.
No.
So it's kind of a trade-off. For some people, just the fact that they won't have snakes, they'll deal with the mothball stink, no big deal. Other people are just like, yeah, that's fine. They don't really get in that often. And we recommend, these other techniques, like keeping your boat covered, keeping it, away, not tied up right smack against the dock, just things like that.
So is it just, do you think it's just habitat or behavior that, cormorants really took off in this general ecosystem, Lake Erie Islands, because of gobies too. That's been a huge food source, almost unlimited supply for them. And is it, you don't see cormorants out on these islands because probably people are here and other things, but is there some reason why you think the snakes are, becoming more dominant and instead of being displaced by cormorants or vice versa? Or?
Well, we do get the cormorant. They're not quite nesting here yet, and that's because their nesting behavior, they don't like if there's a lot of people. We know there's a lot of people.
Right.
And behaviorally, we know that water snakes, they don't necessarily prefer if there's a lot of people around.
But they can tolerate.
But they are very tolerant. They are definitely what we would consider a very tolerant species when it comes to the types of habitats they will utilize. Clearly with the type of food source, their native prey was displaced, and in some cases we don't really see very many of them anymore because of the goby, but they were just happy as can be in replacing those food items with the goby. And then as far as hibernation habitats go, obviously we got a lot of cottage building and construction. That telemetry study I told you we started with, we found that these animals will hibernate in anything. As long as they can get below the ground, they're in people's crawl spaces, they're in old drain tiles, they're in natural structures like the rock fissures and these tree stumps and root balls that they probably would have always naturally hibernated in. But really just about anything. So they are very tolerant.
Do you ever find water snakes out by where the islands the cormorants are on? Or
Yeah, we do have water snakes on West Sister. Not very many of them because of the crazy bird population we have out there, but there are, and there's other snakes out there as well.
I just didn't know if there was enough to sustain both.
And Green Island, actually, the interesting thing is Green Island has some of the largest water snakes when we go look at body size. Of any of the islands on Green Island, and there's a nesting cormorant population out on Green, so yeah, they're there.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask, what did they eat before there were gobies?
The native bottom dwellers that we used to have, so which we still have a lot of log perch. It's a type of darter. I would say we don't have a lot of them, they're still around. But that was a food item. Sculpin, I don't remember the last time we found a sculpin at Stone Lab. I mean, it's been quite literally probably decades. Mad Tom, catfish, other smaller bullhead catfish. We just really just don't see those food items in their diet anymore. And that's, again, probably just due to density. The density of gobies is outrageous compared to a lot of those native animals, which, again, still might be around, but are in far less abundance.
Yeah, that's really one of the keys. In the other work that we do with classes out here, the dominant bottom species by far is the goby, and these other ones are now being displaced really by the goby.
So could the snakes help eradicate?
Another great question, and actually one that we wanted to.
And I think this better be the last question.
Okay.
We gotta move on.
We wanted to kind of know that. We knew that they were eating a lot, and so we did some maximum prey studies and tried to figure out exactly how many gobies the water snake population may be eating. We looked at several different parameters and kind of as far as their life history, digestive rate, maximum prey, and the average estimate for this population, so just considering the Lake Erie Water Snakes, is about 1 million gobies per year in the nearshore waters, which sounds like a lot until you learn that the estimate of gobies in the Western Basin is about 9.9 billion. Yeah, which is crazy. However, the good news is that the foraging habitat of the water snake actually directly overlaps with another species of smallmouth bass, to which a lot of the regulation and these harmful effects that we hear about that came from the gobies are affecting. So these 1 million gobies that the snakes are taking out of these nearshore waters, we would like to think are actually benefiting our local smallmouth bass nesting population. So not all bad.
I'm gonna suggest that we start moving over to the